Welcome back. All right, so as wildly crazy and unpredictable as this draft looks, what is really out there as a question is when do GMs look at Russian players? So, with the uncertainty about whether or not they're going to be allowed to play, whether or not visas are going to be granted, or whether or not they'll be allowed to necessarily leave the country in certain circumstances, as we saw yesterday with Fedotov, who was signing on and coming over to play with the Philadelphia Flyers. So there's definitely some uncertainty. So I'm wearing a Sharks jersey because when I look at Pavel Mintyukov and I look at his overall numbers, I think San Jose would have to jump on this. So they have Erik Karlsson currently and they have Brent Burns, right? Both of them excellent offensive defensemen, but you're going to need to have that next guy. And when you're drafting 11th overall as San Jose is, you're probably not drafting somebody who's NHL ready anyways. So for Mintyukov, he's 6'1.5", 194 pounds, played in Saginaw this year. And a lot of the reports talk about how Saginaw wasn't very good. That maybe he didn't get the kind of coaching that you'd want to see. But Hockey Prospects very high on this kid. They have him 5th overall. Elite Prospects has him at 7. They have him highly rated in a lot of categories as well. Bob McKenzie and TSN have him ranked 12th. So there's a difference here, and the overall consolidated rankings on Elite Prospects have him at 11th. So I thought, yeah, 11th, that's San Jose. Sure, why not? San Jose picks themselves up a defenseman. Now, he missed an entire season due to the pandemic, which a lot of players did. And of course, that's what's being seen as having hurt Shane Wright's value and his year this year. And it did. And it's something that I talked about 2 years ago, how all the shutdowns, it was going to negatively impact the careers of some of these young kids. But Mintyukov, who hadn't played in North America until this year, didn't really miss a beat. His start to the season was good, but by the end of the year, he was considered to be excellent. In 67 games, he had 17 goals, 45 assists, 62 points. So he's seen as a very good offensive defenseman and could very well turn out to be the best in that category in the 2022 class. In fact, looking at it and the differences between himself, Jiricek, and Nemitz, I could see a team going up early in the draft and saying, we'll draft Mintyukov. Some jaws hitting the ground a little bit, but in all honesty, the talent is there. The potential is there. It's just a matter of whether or not you think he's going to be able to come over and play for you anytime soon. Good physical defender, too. So he's good away from the puck. He's good defensively and has some good instincts out there. Fast skater, not an elite level skater, but he's creative with the puck as well. He's seen as having a pretty high ceiling and maybe potentially having a higher ceiling than Nemitz or Jiricek, depending on what you're looking at in a player. Likely needs better coaching for weaknesses to his game. And I saw this in both the book for prospects released by Elite Prospects and by Hockey Prospect. Both of them have quotes from scouts saying he will do better when there's better coaching to train him and teach him and get some of the iffy parts out of his game. There's some parts in his game they're not that happy about, but it's nothing major. Like, it's nothing that I could put on the board and say, like, the number one criticism seems to be he does tend to pinch. There was one scout that said, yeah, he was forechecking on the penalty kill, but I still like the kid. And then there are other scouts as well that were like, I didn't really like him. But if you look at the time with a lot of those reports, they'd be in January or before that. So he seems to have improved as the year went along. It's one of those interesting things where if a scout sees a player in, say, October, you see him again in December, and you go, all right, I've seen him. And then they might improve later on in the season. Does that team necessarily have all the necessary info? And again, there's a lot of players in the draft class. I do not envy scouts. It's a hard job. Scouting is a hard job. Nemitz is seen as the safer pick, and this is from Hockey Prospect. Nemitz is the safer pick, but the higher upside, the higher potential is with Mintyukov. So they see him as being the one with the higher potential. Here's one of the quotes from a scout. Some of the weaker parts of his game are fixable with a good NHL coach. And again, that seemed to be a theme throughout this. When he was on the ice, you wouldn't know they were a bad team. And there were other quotes that were of a similar nature. Basically being Saginaw wasn't very good, but when he was on the ice, it was better. But I think there are scouts, too, that may not have been as impressed with his game, because when you're on a team that's not playing very well, I think it's pretty easy for, and especially I would think as a teenager, to have it start affecting your game a little bit. So That's definitely a debate to be had. Does it hurt a player's development if they're with a team that's not very good or not very well coached? Probably. So we'll see whether or not he's still in Saginaw next year or what you do. So if you're an NHL team and you draft him and you're like, okay, we think we can fix what's wrong with his game, where he goes ends up being really important. So it's not just being able to draft him, it's where he ends up. So I'll be curious to see if San Jose ends up drafting him because, again, I think that with him having first pairing potential and playing a high risk game, here's the other side of it. So you've got Carlson and Burns, two veterans. Who better to train him? Who better to talk to him during training camp? Who better to have available when he needs to bend somebody's ear? You'd have Erik Karlsson, you'd have Brent Burns. And even if Erik Karlsson's not the same player that he was 10 years ago, he's still a pretty good defenseman, and he can still teach a kid a lot of things. So I'll be interested to see if that's where he ends up going. But again, Russian players could drop. They could absolutely drop in this draft because of all the uncertainty around drafting them. So he adapted very quickly. He visibly improved as the season went along. One of the reports I saw said that when they saw him earlier in the season, and then later on in the season he was much, much better and that he improved a lot of his game. So good progression. He's seen as a smart player with good vision as well. So good vision of the ice, good hockey IQ, and good in transition. Good transition game, which is huge in the National Hockey League now. It feels like having a defenseman that can make that good first pass, that can get that zone entries, zone exits, and have those numbers where you want them to be, that also plays well defensively, good positioning. Again, it is hard to find any one part of their game that somebody said, yeah, this is going to sink him. This is why he won't make the NHL. At the very least, he should be a top 4 defenseman at some point in his career. But at best, he could end up being a top pairing guy. He absolutely could end up being a top pairing guy. And so we'll see if he ends up being a pure offense defenseman or if he's a well-rounded defenseman. One thing with the National Hockey League now compared to, say, 30 years ago, you could get away with not being a defensive player back 30 years ago. You could get away with not knowing where your own net is or knowing what your goalie's name is. It's fine. Today's NHL, it seems a lot less forgiving for guys who are just one-way players. And when I see people making comments about some of the more elite players in the NHL, I'm like, well, he doesn't play defense. I just think back to when players really didn't play defense. So it will be interesting to see where he goes. One thing that I'll ask, so there's 2 questions in this. One, if you're a GM right now, do you look at this and go, I'm taking the best player available, he's the best player available for where I'm drafting, whether it's 11th or 12th or wherever? Or do you look and go, I don't know when I'm going to be able to sign him. There's a lot of uncertainty right now. So I'm going to pass on him and I'm going to take the safer pick. And maybe that safer pick becomes a Nazar, whoever, right? And so does he drop as a result? Which means we could see Russian players over this draft end up being huge steals that we look at and go, yeah, he was available in the 4th round because of all the uncertainty. Probably should have gone in round 2. And do we look back and go, yeah, that Mintyukov, he ended up being an excellent NHLer and he was a steal late because of all the uncertainty. So uncertainty as it is, I honestly, I'd still say take best player available and you just cross your fingers. So if I was in a GM position and he's the best player on the board and I got scouts telling me he's the most talented guy with the most NHL upside, I'm taking him. And then you deal with everything else after. That's just me personally. We'll see what actual NHL GMs do. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. Just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.